How is the visibility in the back? Is it okay? Okay, so today is April 14th, 2018. And we could start with the homage to the Buddha 3 times. Let me move the computer to the side. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Okay, so good morning, everybody. Okay, so we have been going through the Anguttara Nikaya, that is the collection of the Buddha's numerical discourses, that is the suttas that are arranged according to this numerical scheme. And we are in the book of the twos, that is short, they're usually very short suttas arranged around dyads, of pairs of terms. And sometimes in these short suttas of the ones and the twos, in order to get the meaning, one has to know sort of the cross-references and find the elaboration and the amplification of them elsewhere. Okay, and that is the case with the sutta that we're coming to right now. This is sutta number 26. And this says, for one with concealed actions, one of 2 destinations is to be expected, that is hell or the animal realm. And then for one with unconcealed actions, one of 2 destinations is to be expected, namely the Deva realm or the human realm. Let me get my... So we know that the early discourses, or the suttas, they speak about 5 realms of existence. So starting from the bottom, we have the hell realm, then the animal realm, then the realm of the spirits, or sometimes called hungry ghosts, then the human realm, and then the Deva realm, or the heavenly realms. And then beings are reborn in these realms in accordance with their karma, their volitional actions. Yeah, I don't want to update now. Okay, so the first 3 realms that I mentioned are considered the dukkati. Those are the bad destinations, the undesirable realms. And then the other 2 realms, the human realm and the heavenly realms, are considered relatively desirable realms. And unwholesome karma leads, or it has the tendency, let us say it has the tendency, the potentiality, particularly the heavier, weightier kinds of unwholesome karma, have the potentiality, if they take on that function of determining rebirth, they have the potential to bring the rebirth into the bad destinations. And the causes for rebirth into the good destinations, the desirable destinations, is wholesome karma. So if wholesome karma takes on the function of generating rebirth, it will bring rebirth either into the human realm, or it's a more refined type of wholesome karma, rebirth into the one or another of the heavenly realms. Okay, so this sutta here is speaking about what is called, the expression is not so clear just when you look at it, what is meant by concealed actions. Yeah, the Pali expression is patichana kamanta. So patichana, it comes from the verb, I think the verb is chadati, which means to cover up, to conceal. And then pati gives it some stronger sense. So if we just look at the text of the sutta, it's a little bit difficult to determine what is meant, what exactly is meant here by concealed actions. But I found that this same expression is used in another sutta that occurs in the Book of Eights in a particularly dramatic situation, very memorable, dramatic situation. Okay, so on this occasion, the Buddha is sitting at the head of the Sangha, and it's a full moon night. And this would be the night when the Buddha should recite the Patimokkha. But actually, in the early period of the Buddha's teaching, the Buddha didn't recite the full set of monastic rules, but he recited what is called the Ovada Patimokkha, which is a set of verses which gives very general instructions to the monks, like Sabapapasa Karanang, like to abstain from all evil, to cultivate the good, to purify one's own mind. This is the teaching of the Buddhas. And then it continues with a few additional verses about patience is the supreme austerity, Nibbana is supreme, the Buddha said, so says the Buddha. One is not an ascetic if one injures others. One who has gone forth should exercise restraint. Verses like that. Okay, so it would be the occasion, the full moon night, when the Buddha should recite these verses to the Sangha. But as the time for the recitation approaches, the Buddha remains silent. Then the Venerable Ananda comes to the Buddha and says, Bhante, it's time for you to recite the Patimokkha. And then the Buddha just remains silent. Then a few more hours go by, and we're now in the middle of the night. Then Venerable Ananda comes to the Buddha again and says, Bhante, it's the middle of the night. Maybe he's saying it to give like a hint. Isn't it time to recite the Patimokkha? The Buddha remains silent. Then a few more hours pass, and now it's sort of like roughly about 3 a.m. So the last watch of the night. And then Ananda again comes to the Buddha, and maybe he's a little dreary-eyed. He's waiting to create an opportunity for all of the monks to leave and to get some sleep. So he comes to the Buddha and he says, Bhante, the night has advanced and the Sangha has been sitting for a long time. Let the Blessed One recite the Patimokkha to the monks. Then the Buddha gives the reason why he hasn't recited the Patimokkha. He says this assembly is impure. And sort of the underlying principle is that the Buddha will recite this Patimokkha only when the assembly of monks is pure, not ultimately pure in regard to liberation, but in the sense of pure in regard to their manifest conduct. Okay, so then when the Buddha said that, then the Venerable Mahamoggallana wondered who was the person that the Buddha was referring to when he said that. And Mahamoggallana is the disciple who was foremost in the psychic powers. So Moggallana doesn't have to go to the Buddha and say, who are you referring to? But Moggallana just fixes his attention. Let me make this all visible. Okay, so the Venerable Moggallana fixes his attention on the entire community of monks. He's sort of a little bit like a scan, doing a quick mental scan of the assembly, going from probably taking them all in a very quick scan. And then he sees, sitting in that assembly, one person sitting there, wearing the robes of a monk with the shaved head, but this person is described as one who is immoral, of bad character, impure, of suspect behavior. And then we come across that expression, concealed in his actions. Not an ascetic, though claiming to be one, not celibate, though claiming to be celibate, inwardly rotten, corrupt, depraved. Okay, then what does Moggallana do when he sees that monk? Anybody know? Excuse me? What does he do? What? Okay, so Moggallana goes to that person and says, "Get up, friend, you've been seen. You cannot stay here." But the person, this apparent monk, just continues to sit there silently. So Moggallana, actually he repeats this 3 times, "Get up, get out," but the person, somewhat obstinate, continues to sit there. Then Moggallana grabs that person by the arm, evicts him to the outer gatehouse, and bolts the door behind him. Then he comes to the Buddha and says, "I've evicted that person, now the assembly is pure, let the Blessed One recite the Patimokkha to the monks." So you see, even somebody who's an arahat like Moggallana doesn't always have to be gentle in his behavior. He can be tough. Okay, but my point is, the reason why I cited this passage, that illustrates the meaning of what is meant by one with concealed actions. And that shows why such grave destiny lies in store for this person. Because it's somebody who is doing evil, but is covering it up and concealing. And even though the passage that I cited refers to the situation in monastic life, but I think probably the same principle would refer even in general day-to-day life. It doesn't mean that if somebody, if a mosquito lands on you and you get annoyed with the mosquito and you slap it, that therefore you have to go into the center of the town, maybe on Times Square, and start announcing, I slapped a mosquito, I killed a mosquito. But if somebody, particularly maybe a person in a position of power, a position of authority, a position which commands a lot of respect and a lot of compliance from others, engages in very grave types of ethical violations. Even, I would say, perhaps heads of Buddhist, in fact, this has been a situation which is repeatedly exposed in the news cycle of Buddhist groups, people in authority and Buddhist communities who have been behaving unethically, especially in their relations with their students, engaging in sexual relations, illicit sexual relations with the students, or funneling off the financial assets of the organization into their own personal bank accounts, and then covering that up, and then hiding that when investigations take place. That would be a person with concealed actions. And so if one finds oneself engaging in those types of unethical actions, and then one is stricken with, then one is reading the numerical discourses and one comes across the sutta and one realizes its significance, then one will think, oh, my heavens, what I've been doing. Then one has to open up one's actions and expose them and admit what one is doing and try to make amends for one's transgressions. Otherwise, if one continues to conceal one's unethical behavior, though one might get away with it through the course of one's life, that karma is there. And when that karma gets the opportunity to ripen, then that could be one's destination. Okay, let's go through. There's actually a group of discourses on alternative types of rebirth. So we could take these in sequence, then I'll open up to questions and discussion. Okay, now we come across a pair of suttas on views. So here we have one sutta that says, for one who holds wrong view, one of two destinations is to be expected. Again, hell or the animal realms. For one who holds right view, one of two destinations is to be expected. The Deva realm or the human realm. Okay, so what is meant by wrong view and right view? Again, I looked into the texts which give explanations of the different types of views. And I found there are actually standard definitions of wrong view and right view found throughout the Nikayas. But the convenient place that I found in the Anguttara Nikaya is in the Book of Tens, Sutta number 176. Okay, so this is describing the person who holds wrong view. And so this is the kind of view that he holds, that there is nothing given, nothing sacrificed, nothing offered, which of course doesn't mean that if I give you a copy of the book, that nothing was given. But the import of this is that there's no particular moral value in giving, or in the practice of charity, or in making offerings to others. Maybe this is the key phrase here that shows that the purport of the entire passage, that there is no fruit or result of good and bad deeds. In other words, that good and bad actions don't create karma that will produce its fruits in the future. There is no this world, no other world. Of course, somebody who's living here can't be denying the existence of this world, but I think the sense would be that somebody living in this world who says that there is no other world, no life beyond this present one, no existence of other realms, no existence of other realms, that would be the person who's presenting this type of view. Okay, then the next aspect of this wrong view, there is no mother, no father. Okay, this doesn't mean that the person is holding that what we used to believe when we were children, that the storks come someday and then they arrive at the chimney with a package and they drop the package through the chimney, and then when the rest of the family opens up the package, there's a baby inside, and that baby is brought up in the family. It doesn't mean that there's no biological reproduction through mother and father. But what it means, sort of the import of this, is that there's no value in looking after one's mother and father. No need to take care of one's mother and father. No need to show reverence and care for one's mother and father. Okay, then that there are no beings spontaneously reborn. That's a little odd. But, okay, according to the Buddha's cosmology, in some of the other realms of existence, the beings are not born through the agency of a mother and father, but they are reborn spontaneously. Probably in the heavenly realms, say if somebody as a human being passes away, when they take rebirth in the heaven, they're not born of a mother through the biological agency of the father, but they just appear spontaneously in the heavens. And I would assume the same is the case in the hell realms. Yeah. Yeah. So in the hell realm, when somebody, who commits very grave, evil actions, when they pass away, and they're destined to be reborn in the hell, they just arise there spontaneously with a full-formed body. It's not that they take rebirth from a mother as a little baby, and then they have to go through the whole process of gradual development. But they arise immediately there, and then the torments begin. Okay, and then the other aspect of wrong view is the denial that in this world there are samanas and brahmanas, ascetics and Brahmins, who have realized the nature of this world and other realms for themselves, and then make them known to others. Okay, and then the opposite of that is the right view, which is the affirmation of all of these same principles, that there is value in giving, in charity, in making offerings, the fruit and result of good and bad actions, and so forth. Okay, if one looks at this statement in the context of the present day, this is my personal opinion, maybe a little bit unorthodox. It seems a rather strong statement because I know people who are very strongly committed to ethical principles, to ethical behavior, very upright in their conduct, and yet because of the influence of scientific ways of thinking and the principle that in order to affirm any proposition, one has to be able to support it through empirical investigation. And so they don't find any empirical evidence for the existence of life beyond the present one, for anything to support the idea that after death we are reincarnated in other bodies. And they also, again, because of the influence of the neurosciences, they believe that the mind is either a byproduct of brain function, or the mind is just another aspect of brain function, or the mind, there's a term that's used in philosophy. Do you know the term epiphenomenon? Wow, you know that. Oh. It took me until I was maybe a junior in college before I came across that expression. Yeah, the word means a property of a substance which is a byproduct of the more fundamental properties of that substance. So it's like you may call it an adventitious or almost an accidental property of that substance. For example, we could take whiskey. I'm not saying you should take whiskey. Don't say that I'm encouraging you to take whiskey. For example, let us take whiskey. Okay, so whiskey has a particular chemical composition, including that of alcohol. And so if one drinks whiskey, then one will become inebriated. So the inebriating potential of whiskey is an epiphenomenon which is based upon its chemical composition, and particularly on the way that chemical composition will impact on the human body and nervous system. So we could say that the capacity for inebriation is an epiphenomenon of whiskey or of alcohol. And so similarly, these philosophical interpretation of neuroscience holds that consciousness is an epiphenomenon, just sort of byproduct of nerves and brain chemistry, the nerve structure, brain chemistry. And so what happens when death takes place is that the brain, the entire nervous system is finished, becomes extinguished. And so there's no possibility of consciousness. So consciousness can't continue beyond death. Okay, so I'm just bringing up the example of somebody who holds a position, and yet they're of very upright conduct, maybe very kind, compassionate, generous. And yet if you ask them, do you believe in an afterlife? They say, no, I don't see any evidence for it. And even if they get into a discussion with a Christian, a Buddhist, a Hindu, say they're on a panel discussion, the Christian will be saying, after death, either heaven or hell, or if it's a Catholic, purgatory. That is, if it's a traditional Christian. The Hindu will be saying that there's an eternal, immortal soul that reincarnates from body to body. And the Buddhist will say no eternal soul, but there's a continuum of consciousness which flows on from life to life. Then we come to the atheist, and he'll say, I don't accept any of these theses. In my view, when death takes place, everything is finished, consciousness comes to an end, and that's the termination of personal identity. And so, would we say that for this person, better be careful, for you, one of two destinations, hell or the animal realm? In my opinion, I couldn't say that.
Then they ignore that evidence, perhaps then it changes from a natural scientific view to wrong view. And then
I would say that they could even be somewhat a person who holds the view that when death takes place, everything is finished, consciousness comes to an end, personal identity comes to an end. But that person can be engaging in good conduct. So in my opinion, if that person is holding that view in good faith, even if they're presented with some evidence, I don't know that there's really compelling evidence that could prove that rebirth takes place on every occasion of death. There have been some investigations. These were done particularly by Ian Stevenson, who was the chairman of the medical department at the University of Virginia back in the 1970s, 1980s, professor of medicine. And he investigated many cases of reported rebirth memories on the part of children. And he's considered different alternative explanations for these experiences of the children, of these memories of the children. And in most cases, or at least the cases that he's published, he said that though other explanations could be offered, but the explanation that is simplest and that's most faithful to the evidence is that in these cases, rebirth, or that person's consciousness is the continuation of the consciousness of the person that they said that they were in the previous life. So he states this very, very carefully. And now these cases have been presented to some skeptics, and the skeptics continue to try to find fault with the evidence or the cases presented by Ian Stevenson. But I wouldn't say that somebody who still holds to the skeptical position based on their scientific convictions, their convictions based on the understanding that's emerged from modern science that the mind and consciousness is a byproduct of brain function. I wouldn't say that that is, in my opinion, please, I hope I'm not going to I wouldn't say that that is a sufficiently strong case of an unwholesome adherence to a view to lay the conditions for a rebirth in the lower realms.
Bhante, I want to, in my opinion, some animals are not that bad at all.
But
last time I looked at my cat, they are very happy.
Yeah, but still, rebirth in the animal realm is considered undesirable, even though many animals live under much better conditions than human beings do. Anybody else have any opinion about this?
Bhante, is it possible wrong view consists of all those things except one part of it? Like no mother, no father, like, because there was a list of things that...
Yeah. That's not actually clarified within the suttas themselves. They're always presented as one block, as though all of these features or factors go together to constitute wrong view.
บางที I wonder, in my opinion, some animals are not that bad at all. The last time I looked at my cat, they are very happy.
Yeah, but still, rebirth in the animal realm is considered undesirable, even though many animals live under much better conditions than human beings do.
Yeah,
Bhante, is it possible that it's referring to someone who takes action based on that view?
This is a very good point.
Like Angulimala, perhaps his sort of...
Like,
Angulimala?
oh, Angulimala.
Yeah, perhaps his sort of serial killing was
Yeah.
based on wrong view because he was going to kill his mother.
Okay.
Perhaps that relates to
Yeah,
the
actually,
view,
yeah,
there is no
Angulimala was
mother.
quite an exceptional case. But
Yes.
what you said brings up an interesting point. And this goes to a sutta. Let me see if I can remember it. It's in the Majjhima Nikaya, middle-length discourses, sutta number 60, the Apanaka Sutta, where the Buddha speaks about the dichotomy of wrong view and right view. And then he says and then he enumerates the different types of wrong view. And one of those types of wrong view is the one that I just mentioned from Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Tens. Then he says that it's the case that when somebody holds wrong view, they will have wrong intentions. So that is the intention of sensual indulgence, ill will, and harming others. And then when somebody has wrong intentions, they will engage in wrong speech, wrong action, wrong livelihood. So that seems to be the premise that underlies this statement in the sutta. So it strikes me, and I've heard what's called some of the secular Buddhists, or the agnostic Buddhists, the atheist Buddhists, argue against that sutta, and I think quite convincingly, that, again, we can take that person who's familiar with the scientific literature on cognitive science, neuroscience, and says, according to the science, the mind is a byproduct of brain function. When you're dead, you're really dead. And yet, they hold to very high ethical standards. They don't have these wrong intentions. They're very kind, generous people. As a matter of ethical principle, they won't kill, won't steal, won't commit sexual misconduct, won't speak falsely, won't slander others. So it seems, anybody else have any thoughts about this? Is that Stacy back there? Okay.
Hi, Bhante. I'm just wondering if there's any evidence of an enlightened person that believed that the mind consciousness is a byproduct of brain function.
In the Buddha sense of being enlightened, certainly one could not hold that the mind is a byproduct of the brain function.
Okay.
Even if that person, the enlightened person, is not able to see their previous existences or to see the passing away and rebirth of others. For example, like what's called the dry insight or dry wisdom arhats who don't have these abilities. Still, I think that they would have sufficient trust and confidence in the Buddha to accept that when the Buddha says that when beings pass away, they take rebirth in accordance with their karma. So they would hold that consciousness must continue in some form after the death of the body.
Yeah, because that's also one of the fetters is skeptical doubt. So
Yeah, yeah,
they would have to realize that
yeah.
it isn't a byproduct.
Yeah, they would have, even if they can't confirm for themselves, but they'll have sufficient trust in the Buddha.
Thank you.
That's actually a good argument against those secular Buddhists who reject the teaching of rebirth. That if they hope to become enlightened, even to reach the level of stream entry, at the level of stream entry, one cuts off doubt and any kind of skeptical doubt about the Buddha and his teaching. And yet if they're denying the reality of karma and rebirth, then they are expressing doubts about the Buddha and his teaching. Okay, did somebody else have something to say? Okay, Matt.
Thank you, Bhante. Isn't this notion of skeptical doubt and empiricism go back even before the Buddha to the Charvaka philosophy that sort of counted the Upanishads and the idea of an Atman and a soul?
And the idea, the Charvakas
Yes.
have
Yes, they're
doubting the existence of the soul,
correct.
advocated in the Upanishads. I don't know exactly when the Charvaka as a school of thought originated, but in the Buddha's time there were schools of philosophers who did hold to that skeptical position. And in fact, I think it might be in some of the Buddhist texts, or maybe it's in the commentaries where they elaborate on that kind of skepticism, and they use exactly the argument or the simile that I use to illustrate the meaning of the word epiphenomenon. So they use exactly that argument in relation to consciousness. So they said that just as the intoxicating property of liquor is a byproduct of the constitution, the material constitution of liquor, so consciousness is a byproduct of the combination of the four elements that constitute the human body. Okay, since I want to go on, so I'll just say my understanding of this passage, that it should be understood against the background of the Buddha's time, when the general sort of consensus in the population was that there's some continuation of personal identity beyond death, that consciousness continues beyond death, and that people reap the results of their good and bad deeds. And that was seen as the basis for ethical behavior. And so advocating a view like this could have been seen as undermining the basis for ethical behavior and sort of opening the door to moral transgression. Yeah, take the microphone.
Bhante, I still think that even though there are some people who hold what might be called wrong view, for instance, denying rebirth, denying afterlife, and are honorable and good people, I would think that they are the minority. Perhaps, or they are, I would think that they are a minority of people who hold that wrong view. I would say the majority of people who hold the wrong view of not believing in rebirth or not believing in an afterlife, I would say the majority of them, either as a byproduct of that wrong view or as something that validates that wrong view, also act poorly, either by engaging in intoxicants or sexual immorality, or perhaps harming people, perhaps saying things as if, well, if there's no life beyond this one, why shouldn't I scam these cancer patients?
Why shouldn't I?
Why shouldn't I scam these cancer patients? Why shouldn't I be unscrupulous in these business practices if there is no account afterwards? I would think that that would be the majority of people who do hold wrong view.
This, I don't know when we'd have to do a kind of survey
we'd have
of
to.
it. But I think it's just enough, I mean, in dealing with this particular question, it's not necessary to take a kind of poll and to see which is in the majority. It's enough to bring up some counter cases.
Yeah.
And there are enough counter cases of those who deny survival of death and yet are committed to ethical behavior.
Yeah, perhaps they do their best to refute any evidence after survival of death or for Buddhism. But they still act beneficially,
yeah.
but all right.
And I mean, not to prolong the argument, but okay, one could take many cases, countless cases of those who believe in survival of death and that there is some kind of retribution, but engage in the most shocking, unscrupulous action. Like you could take these ISIS or ISIL, you know, who on camera will slit the throat of the heretics, the infidels, and they believe that they're going to be rewarded in the afterlife.
That's a different type of wrong view, I believe,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's in the, I mean, when the Buddha in the Majjhima Nikaya enumerates sort of all of the different types of wrong view, I believe there is one that sort of says
that is right, yeah.
Because it sort of stems from a different school of philosophy based on different assumptions of what actions are beneficial and what are not.
Yeah. Okay, I want to move on now. Okay, so this is pretty simple, almost self-evident sutta. So this is where the Buddha is saying, seeing two advantages, I resort to remote lodgings in forests and jungle groves. So what are the two? For myself, I see a pleasant dwelling in this very life, since even the Buddha, though he's enlightened, you know, he doesn't have to do any more meditation to fill out his enlightenment, but he still likes to dwell pleasantly in this very life. And the pleasant dwelling comes from withdrawing into the forest, and then for the Buddha it would be entering into samapattis, into the meditative attainments, whether the jhanas or the fruition attainment. So, you know, being a Buddha, it's a very, very demanding task. Did I use this illustration last week, or was it of what it's like to be a Buddha? Maybe this was when I was in California doing the Abhidhamma program. So you have to deal with, you know, this monk comes to you and says, Bhante, the monks over in the eastern dormitory have been quarreling with the monks in the western dormitory, but this monk is not getting along with that monk. And then, Bhante, would you come to our house for the meal on Thursday? Oh no, I already promised Anathapindika that I would go to his house on Thursday. And then this person that's invited you gets upset and starts complaining to those people, and so
Ante, forgive me if I'm wrong, but wasn't your teacher, your personal teacher, revered as a living bodhisattva? Your Sri Lankan teacher?
Ananda Maitreya,
Yes.
my ordination teacher. Maybe people considered him to be a bodhisattva.
Yes, because it says that on his Wikipedia page.
Excuse me?
It says that on his Wikipedia page that he was a living bodhisattva.
I didn't look at the Wikipedia.
I just was looking at it and I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Anyway, he was the Mahanayaka Taro, which was in the 1970s, the Mahanayaka Taro, who was the head of that particular division of the Sangha. So it involves a lot of responsibilities. So to be a Buddha, it's even many, many more responsibilities. In fact, if you look at the Buddha's daily schedule, I think I have it in the commentary to the Duka Nipāta. Pretty much he gets only about time for about 2 hours of sleep a night. The rest of the day he's busy. Early morning he goes into the meditative attainment of great compassion, surveying the world with the mind of a Buddha. Then he sort of looks to see who are the people out there that need his help that day, that he could benefit. Then when he comes out after taking care of the bodily needs, then he has to go on alms round or to a house if there's an invitation to a meal. If there's an invitation, then he has to give a discourse to the people who invite him. Then he comes back to the monastery. He has to give instructions to the monks, then takes a little rest after the meal, after the instructions. Then again, he has to give discourses to people. Monks will come with questions about their meditation subjects. Then in the evening, at sunset, then the lay people will come to the temple to get a full discourse. Then that night, after the lay people leave, the monks will come with their questions about their practice. Then when the monks have all departed in the middle of the night, then the devas will come from the different heavenly worlds with questions. Then when the devas are gone, finally he thinks, I get a little shut-eye for about 2 hours. Then he sleeps, gets up and does his walking meditation. And then again it's back into the attainment of great compassion, and another day unfolds. Okay, so if you aspire to be a Buddha, be aware in advance of what you're getting yourself into. Okay, so, but every once in a while, the Buddha says, I resort to remote lodgings in the forest or in jungle groves. So one reason is to enjoy this pleasant dwelling. So the Buddha can leave the Sangha in charge. He could leave Sariputta and Moggallana, or Mahakachayana, or some of the other leading monks, give them charge of the Sangha, and then he can resort into the forest and enter into the jhanas, or the formless meditations, or the fruition attainment, and dwell pleasantly. And then the other reason is out of compassion for later generations. So how does compassion for later generations come into the picture here? Give somebody else a chance.
yes.
How does the Buddha, why does the Buddha say that it is out of compassion that I go into the forest for solitary meditation? Carolyn, you should. I thought it would be obvious. Jerry, did you put your hand up?
Bhante, it is just a guess.
Okay.
Nothing to do with my practice or anything, but just a guess.
Yeah.
I suppose when enlightened beings go into retreat, they're engaged in wholesome actions, wholesome, virtuous thoughts. As a result of that, there has to be some effect from that.
I don't think that is as direct an answer as I had in mind. Suki, did you?
I didn't raise the hand.
Oh, but you were smiling that it suggested.
I saw the answer in your
Oh,
note.
oh, good. No, then you're disqualified then.
So I cannot say it.
Yeah, you can't say if you've read the note. Osman, did you?
As a guest, I'm thinking as an example.
Say it again.
As an example for others to follow.
Oh yeah, exactly. Exactly, that's the reason. I thought it was so simple that everybody would be. Yeah, so to set an example. So the Buddha's advice constantly, especially for the monastics, is you should go into the forest, aranyakatova, rukamulakatova, sunyagaragatova. Gone to the forest, gone to the foot of the tree, gone into a secluded hut for your meditation. So if the Buddha is always mingling with kings and princes and businessmen and talking and giving discourses, but never going into retreat himself, then people will start to say, why is he telling us to go into retreat? He's not following his own advice. But when the Buddha goes into retreat, then the disciples will think, even an enlightened one goes off into solitude for meditation. So what about us who are not yet enlightened? We should follow his example. Yeah, take the microphone.
Bhante, didn't Devadatta do exactly that? Say that, Buddha has become lazy and isn't doing any of these things, therefore he split the Sangha on that point?
Not quite. The Devadatta, one of the points that he insisted on was that monks should be only forest dwellers and that they shouldn't be allowed to live also in the village, that there shouldn't be any kind of village monasteries, town monasteries. And so Devadatta was trying to, in a way, humiliate the Buddha by insisting on more ascetic types of practices than the Buddha himself followed. So the Buddha would often dwell in monasteries. In fact, the main monasteries were right outside the major cities, outside Sravasti and outside Rajagaha.
Thank you.
Okay, so that is basically the reason. In fact, I think the commentary gives an explanation of that expression. And what's interesting here, the word that's used for compassion, it's not the word karuna. Karuna is usually used in relation to the meditative practice of compassion. But the word that's used here to indicate compassion is anukampamano, which is based on the verb anukampati, which anu means along with, and kampati means to shake. So to shake along with. And so anukampa, the noun, indicates what we would call a more active aspect of compassion. Karuna is more the meditative aspect. Okay, so anyway, the commentary raises the question, how does he show compassion for later generations by dwelling in the forest? So when young men who have, maybe we should add now, when young men and women who have gone forth out of faith see that even the Buddha, who had nothing more to practice, to achieve, did not neglect dwelling in the forest, they will think that they too should dwell in the forest, and in that way they'll quickly reach the end of dukkha. Okay, now we come to the next sutta. So this sutta is speaking about two things that pertain to true knowledge. And the word that's translated here as true knowledge is vijja. Now I would prefer to render vijja as clear knowledge, since if anything is knowledge, it has to be true or correct. Okay, so what are these two things that pertain to true knowledge? So the two are serenity and insight. So this is samatha and vipassana. So these are, if you can be considered, the two sides of Buddhist meditative development. And as the Buddhist meditative tradition develops over time, the two come to be the headings for two different systems interrelated systems of meditation. So we have samatha bhavana, the development of serenity, and then vipassana bhavana, the types of meditation that lead to the arising of insight. But in the early text, we see that serenity and insight go very closely together. So there are two different aspects of meditative development that have to be cultivated in balance. So different meditators will emphasize one rather than the other. Okay, so when serenity or samatha is developed, what is the benefit? The benefit is that the mind, that's the citta, is developed. And when the citta is developed, what benefit does one experience? And then the benefit is that lust is abandoned. First I'll read the whole thing, then I'll sort of backtrack, and then we'll look at it piece by piece. Okay, when insight is developed, what benefit does one experience? So when one practices insight, then wisdom is developed. When wisdom is developed, what benefit does one experience? Ignorance is abandoned. Okay, if you remember last week, I spoke about the difference between suttas, which are neyata, and nitata. Suttas, which are definitive in meaning, that's the nitata, which are explicit, which don't need interpretation. And then the suttas that are neyata, which are not definitive, which need interpretation. And this particular statement here, the way I would understand it, requires interpretation. That through the development of samatha or serenity, lust is abandoned. And the reason it needs interpretation is because lust or raga is not abandoned in the sense of being completely eradicated by the development of serenity. The practice of serenity or samatha brings samadhi, concentration. And in the mind of samadhi, lust and the other defilements are not present. They don't appear. And so we could say, in a kind of provisional sense or a kind of figurative sense, we could say that in the samadhi that's reached through the development of serenity, the defilements have been abandoned. But we can't say that they've been abandoned in the ultimate sense, the final sense, the definitive sense. Because samadhi on its own is not sufficient to cut off, to eradicate the defilements. The defilements are eradicated only through wisdom. But one could say that, again, speaking in a non-definitive sense or in a figurative sense, that there's a benefit in developing samadhi. The benefit is that these defilements will not be active in the mind. So the mind will be cleared of the defilements. And then when the samadhi is very strong, then even when one emerges from the samadhi and when one is going through the day-to-day activities, the defilements will still be held at a distance. They won't get the chance to arise. The disadvantage or drawback in that is that sometimes meditators who reach deep levels of samadhi, and then when they come out into ordinary life, the defilements don't appear. And so they think, I must be enlightened, I must be liberated. And yet sometimes when they get into this tight situation, then the defilement can appear. To illustrate this, there's a famous, well-known story that comes in the commentaries. It's something that supposedly took place in Sri Lanka many centuries ago. There was a monk who was a teacher, a meditation teacher, who had mastered the 8 meditative attainments. And he thought he must have practiced insight to a certain level, and he thought that he was an arhat. And he had a disciple, I think the disciple's name was Dhammadina. And Dhammadina became a real arhat with psychic powers. And when he was sitting in meditation, he thought, let me see my teacher's level of attainment. And then he used his psychic power to sort of read his teacher's mind. And he looked deeply into the mind, and he saw that the defilements were still there beneath the surface. And so he thought, I have to help my teacher. And so he went, at that time he was living some distance away, he went to visit his teacher. We'll call his teacher Mahatisa, I'll just make the name up. And so he said, Bhante, when did you achieve arhatship? And the teacher said, oh, about 10 years ago. Then Dhammadina said, did you also cultivate the psychic powers? He said, yes. And then he said, can you make a little distance away a very beautiful young maiden? Maybe at that time, the ideal was like 16 years old. Maybe now we would look at her just a little girl. That's 16 years old with beautiful features, very nicely dressed, with nice perfume. See her smiling at you. Okay, he does that. Then Dhammadina says, make her come walking towards you with her arms open like this. So she comes walking towards him. Then Mahatisa, his face flushes red. And then Dhammadina pulls him up and says, why are you flushing? And then Mahatisa realizes, I'm flushing because there's still, even though the lust doesn't actually arise, but it's still there beneath the surface, exercising its function. And right there, he sort of bowed down to his own, kneeled down in front of his own student and said, help me, teach me the practice. Then Dhammadina taught him what he has to cultivate in his insight practice. And then Mahatisa went into his room, followed the instructions, and I think by the next day he was a real arhat. Okay, so that's why I say this statement has to be taken provisionally, or it has to be interpreted correctly. Okay, so it's insight that actually will eradicate all, it's insight that will lead to wisdom, and it's wisdom that will actually cut off all of the defilements, because all of the defilements are ultimately anchored, rooted in and anchored by ignorance. Okay, then the text continues that a mind defiled by lust is not liberated, and wisdom defiled by ignorance is not developed. And so through the fading away of lust, there is the liberation of mind, and through the fading away of ignorance, there is the liberation by wisdom. And I think this could be referring to the fruit of arhatship, because the fruit of arhatship is sometimes expressed as being Ooh. Yeah, arhatship is sometimes called Cheto Vimutti, Panya Vimutti. That is, it's liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom. And so we could say that in that fruit of arhatship, the aspect of Cheto Vimutti, liberation of mind, which would mean the liberation of mind, particularly probably from the defilement of lust or attachment, comes about through the prior development of, or practice of serenity or samatha, culminating in samadhi. And then the aspect of panya vimutti, liberation by wisdom, comes about through the prior practice of vipassana, of insight, culminating in panya, in wisdom. And so when serenity and insight come to their full flourishing, their full efflorescence, their full manifestation, that is in the fruit of arhatship, which is both liberation of mind and liberation by wisdom. Yeah, vimutti is the liberation. Yeah, I point that out in the note. Okay, any questions on this?
Actually, Bhante,
Yeah, please.
quick question. So you said Cheta Vimutti and Pranya Vimutti, you need both to reach arahatship?
Well, both, let's say arhatship is described as Cheto Vimutti, Panya Vimutti.
Okay,
Yeah.
so both, okay.
Yeah. And so the Cheto Vimutti aspect, the liberation of mind, comes about through the prior development of serenity or samatha. And the aspect of liberation by wisdom comes about through the prior development of vipassana, of insight. And then just to illustrate the importance of both, I took a sutta, another sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. This is from the Book of Fours, number 93. There's actually a group of suttas, I think starting with 93, in which speak about the need to bring together both serenity and insight, the need to amalgamate the two. So in this sutta, the Buddha says that there are 4 kinds of persons existing in the world. So one person gains serenity but not insight. Another person gains insight but not serenity. Still another gains neither. And then the 4th gains both serenity and insight. And so the person who gains serenity but not insight should make an effort to gain this higher wisdom of insight into phenomena. Then sometimes later he'll have both. The person who gains the wisdom of insight but lacks that serenity of mind should base himself on the higher wisdom of insight and make an effort to gain serenity. The person who gains neither should put forth extraordinary desire and effort to gain both of those good qualities. And then the person who gains both serenity and insight should base himself on these two qualities and then make the effort to reach the destruction of the defilements. Okay, any questions, anything unclear about this? Okay, so it's almost 11:20 now. So maybe we'll take the break now and then we can come back, say, 12:15 for some discussion. And if any of this discussion that we've had today brought up questions in your mind or further points to discuss, then you can make a mental note of them. Okay, so we end with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so we're going to share the merits with the devas, that's the deities, the nagas, the dragon spirits, the bhutas, or the fair spirits, and with all other beings. Okay, so we start. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva Chirang rakantu sasanam akasata jabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva Chirang rakantu desanam akasata jabumata deva naga mahitika punyantang anumoditva Chirang rakantu mang parang Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya Etavatacham hehi Sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya bhavagupadaya avici hetato etantare satakayupapana rupya rupicha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu Pusantu Nibuting. Okay, we end with 3 half bows to the Buddha. Oh, do you have the flyer? Any more cards? Okay. Yeah, let me just, you can sit down just. Yeah, I want to remind you once again that on April 29th, our organization, Buddhist Global Relief, will be, that's a Sunday, April 29th at 5 p.m., will be holding its annual concert to feed the hungry. And so this is a very worthy cause, a way to both contribute to the well-being of people around the world who are afflicted with hunger and malnutrition, and also to enjoy an evening of high-quality music, and especially also unique feature of this concert will be the mask dances of Bhutan that has been arranged through Tsering here. And so the performers will be Kavita Shah, Kamila Meza, St. Mark's Choir, the Masked Dances of Bhutan, and there was another performer that they left out, but that there'll also be a performance, an additional performance, special performance. Okay, so now we can end with the half bows.